So growing up, I was in trouble a lot. I got in trouble in school a lot. I spent a lot of time in the principal's office. I got in trouble at home a lot. In fact, I remember one specific Friday night when I'm in high school, and it was sort of the perfect storm illustration of how much trouble that I was regularly in. On that Friday night, I was grounded for 3 separate incidents that all sort of met on that Friday night. One thing I had done, I got grounded for an entire month. Another thing I'd done, I got grounded for the next 4 Friday nights. And then another thing I had done, I was grounded that week. And so that Friday night, I was grounded 3 different ways. There was no chance I was going to be going out and doing anything fun. I got in trouble in church. So before we came to church here, when I was in high school, we went to a Baptist church that shaded a little bit towards the kind of the legalistic side. I didn't do super well with that. In fact, I actually got kicked out of junior high ministries, which is, it's a challenge for a church not to even want you to come. Now I tell you that story with a smile on my face, but there is some lasting damage or difficulty that goes with that. I regularly think that I've messed up. I'm constantly hearing a voice that's saying, oh man, this must be me. I must have done something wrong. I'm regularly having to ask the Lord, am I okay? Am I in trouble? Did I do something wrong? If something goes wrong, my first inclination is, oh, it must be my fault. I must have said it the wrong way. I must have been too harsh or too domineering or too loud or tried too hard to get a laugh. I must have done something wrong. Maybe you can resonate with that sort of feeling of guilt that immediately springs up. Maybe you can't, but maybe you can resonate with a different form of sort of negative self-talk. Maybe you resonate with the idea of an inner critic. And there's a voice inside your heart or head that's always telling you, no one likes you. You're not wanted. You're of no value. Nobody needs you. If you weren't here, nobody would care. Maybe you're constantly thinking about how if you could just do things better or work harder or get things to be just perfect, then people would see that you have value and that you have worth and that people would want to be with you if only you could make all of this happen. Or maybe you struggle with the idea of feeling in your job or in relationship that you're not worthy, that you shouldn't be here, that if anybody ever finds out just how bad you are or how incompetent you are or unqualified you are, or if anybody really truly knew who you were, that you would be exposed for being a fraud. Psychologists have terms for these things. We talk about inner critic, we talk about a guilt complex, we talk about impostor syndrome, we talk about low self-esteem. These are all various ways to talk about negative self-talk. And they're not all the same, but they are the same in the sense of they may register in different ways in our minds, but all of us at various times experience that voice in our heart or in our head that's telling us we're not good enough, that's telling us nobody likes us, that's telling us we've messed up, that's telling us we're unqualified, that's telling us that there's things that are just simply wrong with us. This morning, we're continuing our study in the epistle of 1 John. And one of the reasons why God gave us the letter of 1 John is, first of all, he wants us to know that we've received Jesus, that if we are Christians, we have received Jesus, and we want to know that because some of that negative self-talk makes us think that we haven't. But secondly, God gave us 1 John because he wants to know when you receive Jesus, you're not just kind of like becoming a Christian and getting a get out of hell free card sort of thing. You're actually receiving a person. And when you receive Jesus into your life, he brings infinite blessings with him. And 1 John is written to tell us what some of those blessings are. And one of the most powerful blessings is that Jesus comes into our life to help us deal with negative self-talk. And so the passage we're going to look at this morning, I think, is a really, really important passage. And it's really important for addressing this issue that all of us struggle with at various times. The Bible doesn't use the phrase negative self-talk. It's a good phrase. The Bible just doesn't use it. The Bible refers to all of this, the inner critic, the impostor syndrome, the guilt complex, the low self-esteem. It puts it all under the label of when our hearts condemn us. When our minds, when our hearts tell us things about how worthless we are, about how we're always messing up, about how we're not good enough. God has something to say to us in those moments. So let me invite you to take a Bible and turn to the book of 1 John chapter 3. 1 John chapter 3. If you don't have a Bible with you, that's perfectly fine. There's one in the rack in front of you. If you take one of those Bibles, please turn to page 987. And maybe you're not a kind of person who likes to kind of look through books or stuff, and you're like, I'll just kind of listen. I will indeed read our passage, but I think especially with this topic, especially because it's so easy to hear lies, it's so easy to believe falsehoods, I would love, if you're willing, to take a Bible so that you can see the same words that I'm reading, so that they might make as big an impact as possible as we deal with these things. So 1 John chapter 3, again in the church Bibles, they look like this. It's page 987. And if you're kind of new to the Bible, when you get to page 987, we're going to be in the second column, and I'm going to read verses 19 through 24. Verses 19 through 24, 1 John chapter 3. Verse 19, this is how we know we belong to the truth and how we set our hearts at rest in his presence. If our hearts condemn us, we know that God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. Dear friends, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence before God and receive from him anything we ask, because we keep his commands and do what pleases him. And this is his command, to believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and to love one another as he commanded us. The one who keeps God's commands lives in him, and he in them. And this is how we know that he lives in us. We know it by the Spirit he gave us. So we want to take some time this morning and understand what God is saying in this passage as it relates to negative self-talk, inner critic, impostor syndrome, guilt complex, low self-esteem, whatever it may be. We start in verse 19, and John says, this is how we know that we belong to the truth. One of the ways that we know we're Christians is that when we experience negative self-talk, God comes to engage with us during those times. It's one of the evidences that we're a Christian. You might think the evidence for being a Christian is that you never have negative self-talk. That's absolutely not the case. The evidence that we have Jesus in our life is that when we hear the voices in our hearts and heads telling us we're no good, we start hearing another voice telling us that's a lie. That's Jesus' voice. And John says, this is one of the ways. Negative self-talk is one of the ways that we know we're a Christian, because when that happens, God does something about it. Well, what does he do? Well, keep going with me. So not only do we know we're Christians when we struggle with this, but also this is written so that we might know how we set our hearts at rest in his presence. This is what God wants for us. He wants us that the voice to be silent, to be at peace. He wants us to be at rest. What follows are instructions about how to experience rest, peace. We all go through that negative self-talk, and your version might be slightly different than my version. My version might be slightly different than another person's version. But the goal is God does not want us wallowing in lies. God does not want us with the anxieties in our hearts, with us constantly running through all of these scenarios and thinking about all of these kinds of things. What God wants for us is to be at peace, to hear the voices quieted, to be at rest. Well, how does that happen? That's what the rest of the passage explains to us. Verses 20 to 22 sets up two different states. Look at it with me. If our hearts condemn us, verse 20, and then verse 21, if our hearts do not condemn us. So what John is saying is that all of us have two states of being we can be in at any moment. One of those states is our heart is condemning us. We're hearing lies, we're hearing negative thoughts, we're hearing sort of that inner dialogue saying, you're worthless, nobody wants you, you're no good at these kinds of things. You have to work harder if you think anybody wants to hang out with you. You're always messing up, you're not qualified for these sorts of things. That's our heart condemning us, and that's one state that we can be in. John says there is a second state that you can be in, and that's where your heart is not condemning you. That's a great state. That's where you're not experiencing those lies. You're not hearing those sort of voices. Now, please don't think that what John is saying is that you're either a hearts condemn you kind of person or your heart doesn't condemn you kind of person. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that we all spend time in the state where our hearts are condemning us, and we all spend time in the state where our hearts are not condemning us. You might be a person who spends more time in this state than you do here, or you might be a person who spends more time in this state than you do there. But John is trying to say these are two states that all humans spend time in. We're going to spend more of our time talking about this state when our hearts are condemning us, when we're experiencing negative self-talk. We'll say just a few things about when you find yourself in the other state. But in verse 20 it says, if our hearts condemn us, so if we're experiencing time here, we're hearing that inner critic, whatever it may be, we know that God is greater than our hearts and he knows everything. Then verses 21 and 22 talk about this second state. Then verse 23 talks about what to do depending on which state you're in. So verse 23 actually includes the instructions for how to deal with the guilt complex, the impostor syndrome, the inner critic, the low self-esteem. It also has instructions when you find yourself in that state. We'll come back to those. But in verse 23 it says, and this is his command. And then it sounds like he gives us two things to do. But command is singular, because there's one command when you find yourself in this state of your heart condemning you, and a separate, different command when you find yourself in the state where your heart is not condemning you. So one command for each state. So if you find yourself in a place where your inner critic has flared up, or your guilt complex is going on, or your imposter syndrome is happening, or you're feeling a general level of negative self-talk, the command from God at that moment is, believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ. That's the command we're supposed to hear from God for the times in which we find ourselves in this place. Now, what does this mean? Well, John's not talking about saving faith. In baptism, we heard two people tell stories about how they came to saving faith, the sort of faith that transferred them from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of life, that rescued them out of sin and death and all of that, to bring them and give them new life, a new heart, new spirit. That's a beautiful thing. John's not talking about that when he says believe. He's talking about the fact that when you and I as Christians find ourselves listening to negative self-talk, he's telling us, believe God. You see, Jesus came to reveal to us what verse 20 is saying. We know that God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. When John says in verse 23, believe Jesus, Jesus came to reveal to us that God is greater than our hearts. Jesus came to show us that God knows everything. So the command to you and I when we experience negative self-talk is to choose to believe God instead of our hearts. Many of you have probably had the experience. Either you're currently having it in school, or maybe you can remember back to a time in school when you had this experience. You ever had like teachers say, hey, I'd like you to kind of go through some self-assessment and give yourself some grades for how you think you're doing this semester in this class? And you might have written down, hey, look, how am I doing and all these things? And you might have given yourself, say you gave yourself a C for how well you read and understand the material in the class. And then maybe you had the experience where the teacher also is giving you grades, and he or she looks at your C and was like, actually, I think you're really good at reading and understanding. I gave you an A for that. I know that you don't think you're doing well, but compared to everybody else, I think you really do read and understand the material well. Or maybe you've had this experience where you're at work and there's a performance review. And you're supposed to write down your strengths and weaknesses. And maybe under your weaknesses you list, I don't work very well with other people on teams. And that's because on every team you're always running through your mind how everybody's not doing their part and you wish they would do a better job. And so it always has a negative experience for you. But then your boss says to you, actually, I hear great things about how you work on teams because you haven't actually acted on those thoughts that are in your head. And he or she is like, no, I hear all the time you're a really great teammate and people love having you on work teams. Or maybe you're taking dance lessons and you're trying to do the moves that the dance instructor is teaching you. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I did that wrong. And the dance instructor is like, no, that was right. That was right. You did that. Or maybe you're planning a wedding. And obviously, maybe it's your first time to plan a wedding, and you're like, well, here's an idea, but it's probably a really dumb idea. And you share the idea, and the wedding coordinator is like, that's brilliant. We absolutely should do that in your wedding. In each of these cases, the examples are set up to show, there's somebody who knows more than you do in the story. The teacher knows more than you do, and you have a choice. You can either believe your assessment of your reading, or you can believe their assessment. Your boss knows more about working on teams than you do. You can either believe his or her assessment or your assessment. The dance instructor knows more about dancing than you do. The wedding coordinator has planned a lot more weddings than you have. This is what verse 20 is saying. To believe God is that in the middle of negative self-talk, verse 20 is announcing God knows more than you do. He knows everything. When you and I find ourselves in a place where our heart is condemning us, the command from God is stop listening to your heart. Listen to me instead. That, of course, raises the question. Well, how do you know what God is saying? I can hear my own heart really loud and clear. I can hear that voice in my head, and in fact, I've heard it for so long, it feels like God. Well, how do we know what God is saying? Admittedly, this is trickier, but let me give you 3 suggestions, 3 things to sort of look for to help us hear God's voice when we're in a state that our hearts are telling us things we shouldn't be believing. Number 1, you're looking for blessings from God or fruit in your life that he's producing. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you're throwing a Friendsgiving celebration this week, or maybe you threw it last week, and so you invited a bunch of people, and say most of them said yes, but there's one person who just didn't even respond. Didn't respond to the text, the invitation, nothing. Maybe your inner critic sort of kicks in, or the negative self-talk, and you keep saying to yourself, it's because she doesn't like me, or it's because he doesn't want to be around me. And all you can think about is the fact that one person didn't respond, despite the fact that everybody else did. And you think to yourself, man, if only I could do these things, maybe they would like me. I've done all this stuff out of gratitude. They should want to come. Why didn't they even bother to respond? And all of these voices in your head keep running through all this thing. If you were a better person, they would want to be with you. If you did things differently, they would like you. And so you're at Friendsgiving and you're trying to enjoy it, but all you can think about is the one person who didn't respond or didn't come. Well, suppose that at that moment you kind of are sitting around the table and you'd plan for everyone to go around and say something they're thankful for. And as people are going around the table saying what they're thankful for, you just hear just some beautiful stuff. Just amazing things about what God's done in people's lives. And as they're going around the table, you hear gratitude to God. You can just feel this beautiful spirit in the room. That's God saying, don't listen to that voice. I brought here the people I wanted to come here. The person who's not here is not here for whatever reasons they're not here for, but I'm present. I'm pleased with you. I like what you've done. This is a great event. You are my daughter. You are my son. I love you. And then we got a choice. You can either believe your heart that says, this person doesn't like you, no one likes you. If they liked you, they would be here. Or you can believe God who's saying to you, thank you for throwing this party. Thank you for being a good friend. Thank you for having everybody give gratitude. I love what's happening today. And John's saying, the command is, believe him. He knows a lot more than you do. Your heart is not right in this case. So number one, we're looking for kind of the blessings of God or the fruit from God where it's like, okay, God is present. I got to stop listening to this voice. Second suggestion for how we can hear God in the midst of negative self-talk is you're listening for any word of encouragement, any thought that might contradict what your heart is saying. Maybe it comes from a stranger. Maybe it comes from a friend. Maybe it comes from wise counsel. Let me give you an example of this. Imagine you're in a meeting and some things are being discussed and you feel this inner compulsion that you need to share how this is not exactly the way you're thinking about things, and you feel maybe the uncomfortability of having to speak up, but you feel compelled to do it. And so in the middle of the meeting, you raise your hand, you make your comment, and you want to make it calmly and quietly, but you feel the intensity. You feel it boiling up in you. You finish making your statement and you kind of like the room is silent, and immediately your guilt complex kicks in, or the negative self-talk, like, yep, you messed up again. Way too harsh, way too loud. You shouldn't have been saying anything. You should have just kept your mouth shut. But then at the end of the meeting, somebody comes up to you and was like, thank you for saying that. Like, I wanted to say something like that, but I couldn't find the words to say it. Or they come up to you and you're like, actually, I'd never thought of that before. I'd never seen it that way. Thank you for sharing that. I think I understand your position better. That's God telling you, don't listen to your heart. Your heart is condemning you inappropriately. I wanted you to say those things. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. And the command from John is, you got a choice. You can either believe God or you can believe your heart. And the command is, believe God. Third suggestion for how you can hear God speaking and contradicting what our hearts are telling us. This one is a little more of our initiative. So the first two, God's kind of taking the initiative, and we're sort of looking around to see, is there any blessing? Is there any fruit? Is anybody say anything that might be the Lord contradicting what my heart is feeling? This third one, we take the initiative. And that is when the negative thoughts kick in, you, or me, go to God and ask him, what do you think of this? Am I thinking about this correctly? You go and ask God, and what you're going to ask him and what he's going to respond with is you're going to ask him to do this in prayer, but especially through his word. And what you're going to look for is in the moment in which you sit down and say, Lord, right now I keep beating myself up about the fact that I'm unqualified to do these things. I feel totally inept for this project or this assignment that you've given to me. You stop at that moment that all the thoughts are running through your brain and you say, please, Lord, can you tell me what you think? And then you open up the Bible. You either open it up to wherever your reading plan is and you read the next section, or you open up your Bible app and if it's got a verse of the day, you read the verse of the day, or you find a devotional that's Bible-based and you're sort of like, okay, I'm going to read my devotional for today. I'm going to listen to that. You go and listen to a sermon. Whatever it is, you're giving God a chance to respond. Now, he might confirm what your heart is saying. He might be like, yeah, no, you did mess up there. We gotta go apologize. But lots of times, he's going to say, I love you. You're not thinking about this the right way. You're believing lies from your past. I love you. I'm pleased with you. I know this was hard, but thank you for doing that. Yes, no, you might feel rejected by everybody, but that's how this works. If you're my disciple, you're going to experience rejection. I don't know what he'll say, but we're just giving him a chance to say something. And when he does, you got a choice. You can believe him, or you can believe your own heart. The command from God is, believe me. Stop listening to your heart. Again, the command is not stop having these negative thoughts and feelings. That's not the command. The command is stop listening to them. This is what we mean when we say take every thought captive. It's a battle. And your heart and your mind are launching lies at you. You're not supposed to think, oh, I must not be a Christian because I'm experiencing negative self-talk. That itself is negative self-talk. The idea is, no, every human goes through that, some more than others. When that is happening, we're taking each one of those thoughts captive by letting the Lord speak against those things and to say, that's not true. And then the choice is, you got your thought and you got his thought. Which one are you going to go with? The teacher says you got an A, you say you deserve a C. The boss says that you're good at working on teams, you say that you're bad at working on teams. You have a choice. The dance instructor says, no, that's how the dance works. Your heart says, I'm doing it all wrong. The wedding coordinator says, that's a brilliant idea. Your heart says, no, that's a dumb idea. You have a choice. Who are you going to believe? And the encouragement is, God knows a lot more than we do. He knows everything. He's greater than our hearts. Listen to him. Now you might ask, well, how do I know that it's God? Yes, someone came up to me after the meeting or the Friendsgiving. There was a nice sharing time, or I got this passage. But how do I know that I'm hearing God and not just kind of making up my own thoughts? That's a super difficult question. The next section in 1 John 4 actually talks about this. We'll be able to talk more about it next week, but let me just at least say this. God is not only greater than our hearts, he's greater than our doubts about his voice contradicting our hearts. What I mean is this. If he sends you somebody after the meeting and you can't hear what they're saying because you're so overwhelmed with nervousness about messing up and you miss it, he'll send you somebody else. He'll send you another comment. If you missed the amazing stuff happening at Friendsgiving, I wouldn't be surprised if you got a note in the mail from somebody who was there. Or I wouldn't be surprised if somebody, the friend who didn't come was like, hey, I'm so sorry I never replied. This happened in my life. I wanted to be there. The good news is, it's not our responsibility to get God to contradict the lies. God is always contradicting the lies. It's his responsibility to get us to hear it. And so the simple encouragement is this. If you miss the first thing he tries to say when he says don't believe your heart, he'll send you a second. If you miss the second, he'll send you a third. If you miss the third, he'll send you a fourth. He's just really kind. And he's really compassionate. And he knows that we're formed from the dust of the ground. He knows, it's easier to hear your dance instructor's voice or your wedding coordinator's voice, or it's easier to hear your professor's voice or your teacher's voice, or it's easier. He knows that. And so he goes out of his way to give us opportunity after opportunity to hear from him. Now, before we leave this passage, what about when you find yourself in the state where you're not having your heart condemn you? We don't have lots of time to talk about this, but let me just say this is what verses 21 and 22 are doing. And if I could put it very simply, there's a different command when you find yourself in a place where your heart is not condemning you. And this is the command. Love. Meaning, when the voices are quiet, and again, for some of you here, the voices may be quiet most of the time. For some of us here, the voices are not quiet very often. But when the Lord does something and quiets those voices, the command is now, don't spend that time thinking about yourself and how great you are. This is the time to love somebody else by praying for them, thinking about them, realizing that the same lies that you believe, they're believing themselves, maybe in different form. This is the chance to pray and to love others and put their needs first. That's what you do. When you're in this state, we love. When you're in this state and your heart is condemning you, you choose to believe. The last verse of our passage is really important. 1 John 3 started with, so at the beginning of our chapter, see what great love the Father has, and we've translated it lavished, but it's the word given. See what great love the Father has given us that we should be called children of God. Most of us picked up guilt complexes or impostor syndromes or inner critics or low self-esteem from the environments we live in. Maybe it was our upbringing, maybe family of origin, maybe things we've been through. Might be abusive environment, a neglectful environment, a legalistic environment, a performance-based environment, whatever it is. All of us have a natural propensity to believe those lies, but that natural propensity was highlighted or heightened by the environments in which we found ourselves. And so 1 John 3 begins with this great act of love, where God makes us his child. Because from God as our Father, we don't hear any lies, only the truth. We hear only love. And so to counteract those wounds, to counteract the things that we heard, that we're not good enough, that nobody likes us, that we're not competent, that we're always messing up, to counteract those things, God invites us and adopts us into his family and lavishes his love on us to make us his children. That's how 1 John 3 started. 1 John 3 ends with, the one who keeps God's commands lives in him and he in them. And this is how we know that he lives in us. We know it by the Spirit he gave us. This is the second time John uses the word give. The first is verse 1. The second is here in this passage. And this is God's way of closing this chapter by saying, I love you so much that I gave you my Spirit so that you would always have with you my voice. The problem with our hearts and our minds is we take them everywhere with us. In the middle of the night, our hearts are chapping away. On vacation, all of a sudden, here comes a thought. God's like, I love you enough to give you my Spirit so that everywhere you go, you will always have my voice speaking to you. You know you're a Christian, not because you have no negative self-talk. You know you're a Christian because when the negative self-talk happens, here comes a note from a friend. Here comes a sign of blessing. Here comes a scripture passage. Here comes God's Spirit who is with you saying, don't believe that stuff. That's not how I feel about you. I love you. This is God's great gift to us. May he give us grace to hear it, to listen to it, and to believe it.